You're listening to Unbridled with your host, Genevieve and Carly. Welcome to Unbridled.
Morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Unbridled, and I'm your host, Genevieve.
And I'm Carly.
And we are going to be unpacking the incredible world of equestrian sports with stories, interviews, expert opinions, feedback on training, how to source a pony, how to get plugged into communities. And today we're going to be focusing on the incredible sport of equestrian mounted games.
Yay!
And we're going to be talking about just getting into the sport of mounted games, how we both kind of got into the sport, what you need generally to get started, and just some stories along the way. So buckle up and let's start.
I love it. Let's do it.
Something like that. All right. So I guess we can start with me. So I'm going to be your host, Genevieve Aarons. I have been riding in mounted games, or horseback riding, since I was 4, and I'm early 30s now, but I've been doing mounted games since I was 14. So over a decade now of mounted games, which is pretty crazy. Oh, actually, like just under 2 decades, which is crazy. Wow.
Yeah.
And so I have had the honor of being able to work with so many horses over the years. I've brought up over 70 horses into the sport or found other disciplines that were more suited for them. And I have had like 8 or 9 personal games ponies along the way that I got to compete, which was really, really fun. But what's really exciting, I think, about my situation is that my whole family does mounted games. And so I'm very blessed that I get to go out and practice with my mom, who rides and has competed in this sport. I've got both of my brothers who compete in this sport, and then they both married wonderful women who are equestrians who also compete in the sport. And so it's like a big family event. And mounted games in our region here, we've got like 6 major competitions that we go to. And for those who don't know what mounted games is relay racing on horseback, except they're like 15 hands and below.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know a lot about horses, or if you're new to horses, it's like a unit of measure of 4 inches is a hand. So anything below 15 hands is acceptable. In some of the outbreak organizations, you're allowed to ride bigger horses, but generally speaking, it's easier if your horse is shorter so you can reach things closer to the ground. But mounted games is basically relay racing with 3 formats. So you've got individuals, pairs, and teams. Teams is probably the most popular in the United States right now, but overseas, individuals is very, very popular too. And pairs, I think, at the world level. So here we do teams competitions, which are going to be 4 riders in play and 1 rider as a spare. So typically 5 riders are going to be on a team at one time. Just realized my hands are like at my shoulder level. So it's good. It looks like I'm not gesturing it so much.
That's all right. I'm about to use my hands. As soon as I start talking, it's just going to look like this.
It goes everywhere. But mounted games is such a great spectator sport, and it's such a great community of riders. So if you compete in other disciplines like eventing, show jumping, dressage, it's very singular in you and the horse are out there competing. And it's about how you go out there and make an effort for that day. But in mounted games, particularly in the team sports, it is not just you and the relationship with your horse, but it's you and the dynamic with your team and your relationship with your team members as you compete. So Carly is actually on my team at the open level, which is so exciting. And if you didn't know, for those who are new to the sport, right, there's different level structures with each organization. There's multiple organizations in the United States, but generally speaking, in MGAA, which is kind of in our region, you're going to have your open teams, which is going to be your fastest level of play. Probably people are galloping, they're getting on and off the horse at a vault, or they're galloping most of the skills and leading off the ground, stuff like that. The next level down is probably going to be your intermediate level. People are going to be cantering, trotting skills. There's still going to be the same level of team play, so you can still have your individual pairs or teams. Then you have novice, where riders are going to be walking and trotting. You have lead line, where riders are going to have an assist throughout all of the game, typically at a walk, maybe a tiny bit of trot. And then you have your O25, which is actually one of the most competitive divisions in MGAA, has the most turnout, and it's going to be riders who are over the age of 25 years old that aren't interested in playing maybe at the top speed of open. So we ride in open here, but there are compatible divisions in USMGA. an IMGA, which is the governing organization for maybe World Play. So if you were to step back and look at mounted games, like you're brand new and you're coming in, you're like, oh my God, you're throwing out all these acronyms. But you basically have this top umbrella, which is the IMGA group. So International Mounted Games Association.
Right. International Mounted Games Association.
Yep. Yeah. And then each country is going to break out with like their major rep. And then they have sub-organizations within those countries. And the United States being so big regionally, we just have so much landmass. I feel like we've broken out into a couple more maybe organizations. So in our region, we participate in MGAA. That if you were to go down south, you're going to have more US MGA competitions. But this cast year is about mounted games in general. So if you hear us throw out terms like open and you're competing in something compatible, totally fine. It's just a term here.
Same difference.
Yeah, Carly is on the team, and I figured maybe you would want to share how you got involved in games. I can bounce off that too.
So I was just thinking about that, like, okay, but 20 minutes before I hopped on, I was like, I should probably get my year straight because I need to try to remember what year I actually started. So I met Tommy in 2016. And then I think I started riding with you guys like mid 2016 and then actually started gaming like early 2017.
Isn't that crazy?
I know. So 2017 is when I started gaming, which was like, 6-ish years ago. And I just worked my way up. Like I never really rode. So I did ride growing up, but it was more like I took lessons here and there. And then if anybody had a crazy horse that they didn't want to get on, I was like, I'll do it. I love it. I fear no death. So I would just hop on the horse. So that was my experience before getting involved in mounted games. And then I met the lovely Aaron's family and they introduced me to all of their lovely ponies. And then I started riding Tom's pony, my husband, aka Genevieve's brother. I competed on Charlie for my first season in games, which is a 14 3-hand quarter pony cross Pasofino. Yeah.
And by comparison, you are not a 14 2-hand rider.
No.
Like I'm 6'1", so I'm super mad tall. But
and I'm 5'4" and like struggled to get back on my first season. It was a mess, but I loved every single second of it just because like the first time I started playing games, I was like, this is my sport. As fast as you can go. It's a team environment, which is what I'm used to. Like growing up, like in high school, I played soccer, basketball. Like it's a team environment, team sport. You have to rely on your other players to be able to, meet your goal, like win. Yeah. So mounted games just made so much sense to me when I started.
I think that was me too. Like I just grew up with the whole team atmosphere. Like my mom played soccer, my dad played softball. Both the boys were varsity baseball players, and I was an equestrian. So then I'm in like the solo sport. And what I think is shocking, so you see like parents get kind of drug into the sport and they have kids that just get exposed and they might think, oh, well, I don't know if my kid needs to go get formal lessons, to be able to do something like this, or if they're actually going to get the education by doing mounted games to be able to be a good rider going forward. And what is actually really interesting is Pony Club, which is probably what brought a lot of the mounted games play over to the United States. But Pony Club really introduces the youngest kids into mounted games early because mounted games actually encourages a lot of the independent hand seat aids and being able to read your pony and ride your pony while also thinking independently. And what I thought was really interesting is if you look at the highest levels of play, there are so many men that compete there. And so many of them will say, I started because I started playing mounted games, and mounted games was a team, like competitive, like rough and tumble kind of sport, but they got the independence that they needed to be successful going forward. So it's cool that I don't find as many people, I think, in my generation that only started with games. And it's such an encouraging thing to see that you started and you are such a great rider. Like, honestly, you are so independent and you're, but you have such a solid foundation, and you would think that you've been riding for years and years before you ever played.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's probably because of my lifelong obsession with horses. Like I have always been obsessed. Like I told myself as soon as I graduated college, I would buy my first pony, which of course, I did, and is Remington, and he's perfect. And so I purchased Remington in 2018. So
it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
5 years now?
Yeah, I've only had 5 years. And I'm like, I feel like I don't remember life before him, to be honest. Like he's just perfect, and we've come a long, long way.
So far.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that just over time we should unpack. But in the United States particularly, I think if you want to get into mounted games, you've got to bring up your own pony. I mean, there's not the saturation of ponies that you see overseas that have already been started in mounted games that have years of experience that you can just throw a kid on. And you are super blessed if you find that pony in the United States. But
Well,
so many
they're
people
$25,000.
exactly.
That you can throw a kid on.
And that's the thing about mounted games. It's supposed to be an affordable price point coming in. And I know the market's been crazy, but you don't want to discourage people from starting the sport just because they have a pony that is difficult as they start, right? Because you're bringing this pony up and now the rider is trying to learn these skill sets and learn this whole new sport. And they've got a pony that is also in the same boat, right? It's very, very difficult, but it honestly, if you put the time in, it creates the best riders over time and it creates the best bond between the horse and rider.
Right.
I think if you invest that there.
Yeah. Definitely. No, honestly, I think games is probably the best sport. So I'm all about like taking risks. I'm like hardcore, like wanted to play rugby when I was a kid. I just like the rough games, like the risky games. So when I found mounted games, I was like, okay, this is awesome because not only do I get to have a team sport here, but like I'm also get to focus on myself and the relationship between me and my horse. And then on top of that, like the skills that you have to learn in mounted games there's so many more skills to learn in that atmosphere than there are for eventing or dressage or Western sports or things like that, because you have to learn to vault on and back, like, off your horse and then back on. So Western, you just jump off your horse at a gallop, to be able to like tie up the cow or whatever. And then for mounted games, you have to jump off, pick something up, and then jump back on. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like the vaulting on top of it. So it feels like it's all the sports put together is the best way for me to describe it to anybody.
And it's so great because of that too. Like I feel like we have such an opportunity to expand and really have riders that come from a Western background or that come from the eventing background or even dressage that want to do something different with their pony. You don't have to go out there and want to be a top team member or ride at the highest level, but you can still get so much out of it because it is so different every time that you're out there. So in mounted games, there's like 23 races, I think, for MGAA. There's varying numbers depending on the organization, but there's a lot of foundational races that you're going to have, like pole bending that you see in Western. It's similar, but you're going to be relaying like a baton object as you're riding. There's going to be like we play sock race where you have a bucket in the middle of the arena and you go out and you dunk something and you ride to the end of the arena. You jump off your horse like you're saying, you grab something, get back on, whether you're mounting or you're vaulting, and then you have to either bring it back and hand it off or you dunk it, right? This just two simple races, and there are 23 of them. And so when we go out there, and practice with our horses, you can literally and I think when we practice, we tend to pick like 5 races, maybe max, like that you're going to drill. Yeah. And there's so much that you can work on as you're training your pony. You're working on having the rideability of being able to have a high energy environment and bring your horse back to a stop or push your horse out and ask them to gallop. It's a lot like the working equitation scene, I think, where you've got to be able to have that rideability and control. You're kind of swerving in front of barrels, or you're asking your horse to move while you're on the ground or to wait while you're on the ground. Just they have to be able to read the rider.
That's
and
exactly
all of
what
that
I was
just takes
thinking.
time.
I was like, honestly, the closest sport I could think of is working equitation.
Really? It is. Yeah.
Yeah. But working equitation is just between the rider and the horse.
Exactly.
Versus mounted games is an entire team.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that can be challenging for riders that are coming into the sport is not only are you trying to plug into a group of people you can practice with, because you got to practice at some point, but you've got to collect some equipment, right? And there's just not a lot of resources that go over how do I get into the sport? What equipment do I need? How do I plug in with other riders, get a team together? How do I get to the competitions? And that's what this podcast is going to be about going forward. We're not necessarily going to unpack all of that right here, but our goal is to start spreading awareness and creating like a common opportunity for us to talk about what people are doing and sharing like best practices in travel or how you actually formed a team or kept a team together. So in the past, because I have been riding for so many years, I had this intermediate team, and everyone who's ridden an MGAA has heard of Aftershock, the intermediate team. And I have over the years had the greatest mix of kids that have ridden on that team with me, because I was always bringing up younger green horses. And so I might compete at different levels on like fixed teams with my main competition horse, but I would always have this Aftershock core team that I'd maintain through the years, where I could bring like those green ponies onto the field and give them some experience. But we actually had Aftershock, the team itself, had a presence for over 12 years in MGAA. And so it became like a thing where there was the maintenance of bringing people together and keeping team unity throughout the years, and making sure that people just understood how we wanted to go about competition. And we're not out there, right, to win any awards. We're not getting $100,000 or a college scholarship. And over time, just developing the kids to realize that you're out there to be the best you that day, to ride the horse that shows up that day.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to be that supportive team member that's encouraging the others through whatever difficulties they're facing. Let the negativity roll off, and don't hold it against them, and just continue showing up and trying to improve personally. And in that, you're going to start improving as a team. And I think that's been such a cool experience for me, being able to work with so many, and I say kids, but I'm in my 30s, so it'd be young adults or even teenagers that would come onto the team, and just helping to create a foundation where they saw that a team can operate without it being catty or being like that typical high school college team experience. And that's the thing I think that is unique with mounted games. We not only have our individual relationship with our horse, but now you have the personal dynamic of all these people, and how do we operate in a very stressful situation where it's me, my toddler partner, and 4 other people. So it's and I have Appaloosa horses. I, for some reason, have settled over the years on really enjoying my leopard Appaloosa ponies. They are so particular. I would never recommend that someone get an Appaloosa as their first horse. And if you have, then I admire you, because if you're doing well, then you're doing something right. But they are so particular and very intelligent. They're like the poodles of the horse world, where they just remember absolutely everything good and bad that has ever happened to them in their life. And that makes them incredibly reactive. And I think they are like the ultimate toddler when you're out there riding. But for me, I know over the years, it's been difficult to show up and have this horse that, he might have a bad day or he might have a great day, and try not to exude that negative energy towards the rest of the team, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's, I think, one of the most exciting things we have going for our open team right now is everybody sort of has that foundation.
Yeah.
It's,
Oh my gosh, I love our open team right now.
right?
It's such a great mix of girls, and we're kind of all like at a similar path right now in life, and we've got these made games ponies. Basically, all of us have these games ponies that we've been working with for the past 5+ years, and we're kind of just all meshed together this year, and it's working out really well.
And it's exciting, but I think it's worth noting that if you're new to the sport, it takes time to find that mix.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that anybody is a bad person, or it just might not be there. Like, you're not going to marry every person that you meet. Sometimes it settles and it works, and sometimes it doesn't. But it's a small community, and learning that if the first team just doesn't necessarily work out, like letting it roll off your shoulders, don't burn bridges, like you're still friends, but just move on and keep mixing it up. And I really encourage riders that come into the sport to ride with a lot of people. I think there's some danger with just riding with one team for years and years and years and never pushing out, even if you do it in separate competition, like you have your team, but you do pairs with other people. Like, so when we talk about there being a team aspect, right, it's not just about having all these other riders that are going out and doing their independent thing, but we actually really rely on one another in our sport, because you're doing stuff like handing off at a gallop. So you've got 2 ponies barreling in like head to head at speed, and I've got to be able to confidently trust that rider coming in at me is not going to hit my horse, but it's going to stay close enough to me that we're going to successfully be able to relay an object at a gallop, right, on both fronts.
Yeah.
What is interesting in mounted games is not only do we have a team sport, but we have it's not like you're going out and doing like team eventing where you have your run and it's totally independent and we rely on each other because we all have to show up and do our own individual part excellently. Sure, that's part of it, but we also legitimately have skills where you have to rely and trust the other rider that's, barreling in at you at a gallop, and you're trusting that they're not going to hit your pony, but they're going to stay close enough that you're going to be able to relay an object at a gallop. Or we have a race with hula hoop where I have to jump off my horse and hand my horse off to my teammate. And then I've got to run ahead, hop through a thing, and look back and hope that they're actually like still together. Everything is moving in the right direction and they're going to catch up with me so I can jump on.
Right.
And I think the most exciting things is you just don't know how that's going to go until you put some time into your team. And I feel like it takes seasons to really get there. I mean,
I think that what you said was so important though. Like, you have to play with a bunch of different people. So like growing up in high school, everybody's regular team it's the same people every year because you go to the same high school, right? So you play with basically the same people. Maybe you have some people that drop out, some people that join, but primarily it's the same team. So for mounted games, it's not going to be the same team. You can hop on and off different teams and you can see what people you jive with. And once you mentioned that, like the first person that popped in my head was Matt Brown. So he's got like his team that he rides with throughout the season, but he's told me before, and I respect him so much because of this, but he likes to seek out different people in the games community that maybe he's never ridden with before. And he seeks them out and goes, hey, for a pairs competition, do you want to be my partner? Like, even one point when I just started riding, he reached out to me and was like, I'll come pick you up. I'll come pick up your pony. We'll go to a pairs competition together. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so great. And it's just so, he's the perfect example of you've got to ride with different people. And that's what the community is about.
Absolutely. So I cannot agree more. And the reason that it is so important that you have that mindset is if you stick with one group of people, like 4 people, like my family, the whole family rides, right? So I have this group of people that I can practice with. But what's interesting about mounted games is that, especially in the United States, we're so spread out. So on our team, right? I mean, I'm in Virginia. You're in like Maryland. We've got a rider who's up in New Hampshire. We've got rider in Pennsylvania. Like, we've got someone in New York, and we're all on a team together. I mean, and it's so exciting because you get to ride with women from so many different areas, different backgrounds and different experiences. And then you get to come together and you get to really try to polish it up. But I find that the riders that have come to this point where we can ride with people from so many different regions only get there because we've put some effort into trying to ride with multiple different partners or different team members as you go. So when you get started, try not to get too locked in on, I need to have a core team and it has to be the same people that whole year. And if that works out for you, great. If you have a team with a coach and they've formulated stuff, fantastic. But I encourage you to practice with others, get on pairs with others. And the reason is not only for you, but your pony as well. And it's so funny, but I remember having one rider that came out and was on this bay pony, and they had partnered with, and we're doing like a gambler's choice. This was years back when gambler's choice was very common. You'd show up and you sort of draw a partner and then you switch to somebody else and draw a partner and so on. And they had mixed with a couple of people and they're doing fine. Got with me in the spotty. And this pony just looked at my horse like he was literally a ghost. He was like, something's wrong with you. And so we would go out and do our skill and come in, and the horse was like rideable. We were doing all right. And this pony was just like, the pony's lava. I mean, the bay was just like, there is no way you are coming anywhere near me. Something is wrong with you. I don't like your aesthetic. Like, and it didn't matter how slow I went. The pony was just like, that is not cool. And it was because, he just hadn't had the experience and exposure to ride with different kinds of horses, different speeds of horses who jig in and kind of twist as they come in, or horses that come in very quick or go out really quick, so on. Literally, the color of the horse can disrupt play. And all of that, it's so important to get out there and ride with so many different people so that when you get to a point where, like we are, you formulated a team with people from different regions. I think even regionally, you find different skill sets kind of played. And so like bottle handoffs, there's very technical ways that you can play, and there's different ways that you can hold it when you hand it off and different ways you can hold it when you set it down. And when you're galloping, you need to be pretty tight about how you operate and the mechanics of it. And I find if you've never ridden with somebody maybe that holds the top of something and you've got to grab the bottom, or the vice versa, right? It's very, very hard to do it well when you become a team and you pull together.
Game over.
It's
Game
so
over.
hard.
It happens like that.
Like instantly. And
Yeah.
dropped handoffs, and and handoffs are so important. Being able to pass like your baton, or being able to pass the sock, or being able to pass a bottle all at a gallop. There's different ways of doing it. You've got to be able to communicate with your team how you want it to come. Like even
Right.
Hug a Mug. I always love that race because everyone has a different presence.
It's
like
so different for everybody.
every
Yeah.
rider. And so
Yeah.
you're out there and we're all gearing up. And so Hug a Mug is where you have all of your bending poles. And so in mounted games, I guess I should step back. Your field of play is going to have a set of bending poles. So 5 bending poles to start, about 30 feet between, and then another set of bending poles, 30 feet between, bending poles, so on and so forth, for however many teams that you're going to have in play.
Each of
We've
those
had
are
up
lanes.
to like
Yeah.
8 lanes of play at once,
Yeah.
I think. It can
Yeah.
be quite a lot of ponies that are all in the arena at a time. And so when you're competing, you're going to be competing either on the pole lane or between the lane, and whichever one you start in. So it could be your, poles for bending. Every team is going to be at a set of poles. Or if it's going to be sock, which is placed between the sets of poles, that's kind of your aisle that you stay in. And each person has their assigned aisle. And then you rotate between races to make sure that it's fair. Let's say you're closer to a fence line or you're closer to equipment. Make sure everyone's reasonably exposed. But in mounted games, there's a race called Hug a Mug. And so Hug a Mug, you have your lane of poles. So you have 4 poles that are out in play. And then you have a barrel that's set at the very end. And so you'd ride out with your mug and you set it down on one of the poles, turn the barrel, and you've got to hand off a mug. And mug's like, can't turn my mug around.
Honestly,
right?
it's like, yeah, but it's
But you got this open part and you got this closed part, and you got to hand it off. And you've got riders from, 5 different regions, 4 people out in play, and you're going to be blasting off. And as you do, you're screaming like, how do you take it? And people
do you
want
want
the
it
side of it.
open? Do you
Yeah.
want it closed? Do
Like,
you want it to the
open,
side?
closed.
Like,
There's so many different ways of handing it off. And it's the same with bottles, and being able to communicate that and take it the different ways or hand it off the different ways is so important, because you just don't know how your team is going to be composed, particularly if you scramble onto a team. So if you're new to mounted games, the biggest takeaway is 1, jump right in. Like, just try to get plugged in to ride with other people. If you don't have people in your region, then the best thing that you can do is get some foundational equipment, which we'll talk about in a second, but try to get plugged in. If you want to compete, reach out to an organizer and scramble onto a team. So it is very, very, very common that people do not have formed teams, and they literally will just kind of like form them on the fly, or they'll plug you in to ride with other people. If you're new and you've been practicing a little bit, that is absolutely fine, and no one's going to judge you if you go slow. As long as you get out there and you ride, you're going to be able to build those connections to maybe form a team or plug into a team in the future. But then the next biggest thing is ride with as many people as you can, or scramble consistently through a season. Like, that is fantastic, because then you get out there with 4 new riders every single time. Find something to work on.
right. It's really good because so many times people come up like with a lamb pony, or somebody's not able to ride like last minute. And if they can see that this same person has consistently scrambled throughout the season, then they'll reach out to you and they'll be like, hey, can you come ride with me? Because they'll know that you are a solid rider. They'll see you out there and they'll just be like, hey, I know so and so is willing to come out, and
Yep.
we need to make a team. So it's always great to scramble, especially when you first start.
And it's so in mounted games, you're technically allowed to ride with 4 riders when you ride on a team. So 4 is how many riders you're going to have in play on the team like session for each race. Typically, though, you want to have 5 riders, and you want to have 5 riders so that you can have a pony. Like, usually you're going to have like a steady, consistent pony that just goes out there and kind of has a solid canter and the rider can just sort of play the skills at a very consistent speed. They don't need to push. There's no breakneck, but that pony can come back and stand like effectively, you've got to have that critical pony on every single team. So even if you're not fast, if you can get to a point where you play slow, but you're consistent, you're an asset to pretty much any team.
Right.
Then you've got the teams where you need the pony that has a lot of speed, or you have to have that one pony typically on the team that's just going to be able to go, because there are some positions in races where that's a benefit, right? But because you've got that one pony that is super fast, or you've got that one pony that's relatively slow, you kind of want to have 5 riders so that you can mix accordingly for the different races where you have your accuracy or your speed races. And so it is super important to teams as they're forming that they field the 5 riders, which, like Carly was saying, means they're going to be looking for people who want to scramble anyway. So best thing you can do is plug in by reaching out to an organizer. If you don't know how to get to an organizer, look up like USMGA's website or MGAA's website. Look at the different competitions that are listed and reach out to one of the organizers. They will help plug you in. Or their Facebook groups for any of the organizations. You can definitely join like the MGAA Facebook group. Just put a post out there. How do I get involved? And someone will jump in and help you from the region.
Yeah. Someone will always answer. And then even if you just send like an email to the MGAA website, it goes straight to the board, and the board consists of a bunch of people, and they all get that email immediately. And then someone always jumps in and goes, hey, I'll reach out to them, or I'll get them in touch with so-and-so that I know lives nearby. So anytime you reach out to them, make sure you let them know where you live, and then they'll get you in contact with the closest person nearby. So you can even like trailer over for practices, or they can come pick you up sometime, or just, you'll just reach out to them.
It's how, you get plugged in, and honestly, you can reach out here. We're going to have a Facebook page. If you are absolutely desperate and you feel like you're not getting a response for any reason, just reach out to us and we'll at least try to steer you in the right direction, right, to an organization where you can get plugged in. If you don't have a group of riders right near you that you can get to, even when you do reach out to the organization, you shouldn't be discouraged as well. There's so much that you can practice independently. Really, handoffs being the one thing I think you've got to kind of plug into a team to try. But past that, most of the races you can really practice and get very, very solid just on your own at home. And then just drive out to a competition. All of it. I think every single rider that has been competing for years knows that we drive quite a ways to go compete. It's a whole weekend affair. You tend to end up camping, or you get like your Airbnb or your hotel, whatever, but it is like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You go for the whole weekend. It's a huge family community affair. But you have to commute. So it's going to be the 4 hours or the 8 hours. There are riders who go over 12 hours, which is crazy, but they do it because of how invested they are in the community, which is just a fabulous group of people. But if you are new to mounted games, I think one of the first things that you're going to ask is what do you need to kind of get started? And so you can always download the IMGA rulebook, which is going to be on your MGAA website, your USMGA website. Your IMGA rulebook is going to have your foundational equipment pulled together that you can kind of build. The great thing about mounted games is that you can pretty much plug in with stuff that you can get from Home Depot. So
you can make a lot of the equipment.
Yeah. And if they tell you you have to buy it, you don't really. I think most riders who started, in the 90s, 2000s, we were all just pouring concrete into like paint cans and making it happen. So it's honestly, and that is one of the like ways. So your bending poles are going to be your foundational equipment that you've got to get. You don't have to go out and buy an expensive set of bending poles. You can look up tutorials, but essentially you're just going to get like a 1-inch PVC pipe, and you're just going to plug it into a paint can, pour some concrete in, and boom, you've got your bending pole. You need 5 of them. Great place to start. The next set of equipment is going to be your 18-inch cones. And they're going to, I think your 18-inch cones are going to be your larger cones, actually. Wait a second. It's 18, and then I think maybe it's your 12. I know. I'm like, I feel like 18 is like way.
No, 18 is like
12.
your normal size cone.
Do we think?
So you have your regular cone, just like regular cone that you would
We
find
should pull
at Home
up.
Depot,
We should
right?
pull up the rule book at some point.
That's a good idea.
Go ahead.
But then for like, if you have like a cutoff cone, so for cutoff cones, you would have to put like flags or like equipment inside the cutoff cone. So you just get the same cone, and then you just cut around and you cut the tip off of the cone, and then boom, there you go. You have a cutoff cone.
Exactly. And so what she's talking about with cutoff cones and I just assume, right, if you're plugging in here, there's going to be a lot of riders as we go. We're going to get into interviewing some of the top riders. We're going to be talking about more of the specifics of training, technique, how you perfect things like your vaults or how you work on ponies that are sour. All of that's going to be discussed. But if you're just jumping into this episode, I assume that you're probably getting exposed to mounted games, or you're getting obviously exposed to us for the first time. So mounted games is a super intimidating sport, though, because it has so many races, it has so many people. You've got a full team aspect, you've got this community that you're getting engaged in, and we don't have all of the online resources. Maybe we should, like video tutorials and how you build equipment or something like that. So it's overwhelming. It's a lot. But honestly, if you were to step back and break it down, get connected, reach out to somebody, Facebook group, organizer, us, it's fine. And then start building up your foundational equipment, your bending poles. You're going to need your we're talking our cones. I'm thinking it's 12 to 18 inches, but they're in the IMGA rulebook. I should know this by now.
Can't be 12. That's only a foot. That's short.
We think?
It's taller than a foot. Definitely.
I feel like they're 18 inches. So your 18-inch cones, and that's going to be for like ball and cone, where you're leaning and picking something up off the cone. That'll be fundamental. And then you're going to have a bucket. You can just use any bucket. Honestly, you're going to have a little bit smaller buckets for sock, but you just get some buckets. And then you're going to take like some water bottles, maybe cut off the top, and that's going to be your cartons. There are very easy ways to make equipment that you can use to practice with your horse. So you don't have to spend a whole lot of money. When you mentioned cut cones are used for flag races. So you're going to take that 18-inch cone and you're going to cut a couple inches off of it. Again, you're going to read the IMGA rulebook and not take Genevieve's word for it. But you're going to cut a couple inches off of it, and then that's going to create like this opening that you're going to be able to set a flag into or pull a flag out of. A lot of the races are going to utilize those cut cones as one of the core pieces of equipment. You're going to need 2 to start, 3 ultimately if you want to play races like 3-pot, but 2 is going to be like kind of the sweet spot. Then for flags, which are the sticks that you're going to be putting in and pulling out of the cones, you're going to be using like dowel rods you can start with. So just wooden dowel rods you get at the craft store are fine. Or you can go out, you can get some small PVC pipe and cut it to about 4 feet in length. So it's very simple equipment to build. How you build it, maybe we'll get into in the future and do a series. That could be pretty cool to like break down how you build some homemade equipment. There are also resources if you were to go on any of the groups. There are like packs of people who build certain things, like maybe the steel bases, the formal ones, or build your joust boards, etc. So you can go out and build or buy all your formal equipment. But if you're just getting started, just a couple of core things: bending poles, cut cones, full cones, your flag, dowel rods, and your barrels. And your barrels are typically going to be your 32 gallon trash cans, and they're going to be flipped over, and then you're going to cut out a piece of wood, like a circular piece of wood that you set on. If you don't have that, you can start with the plastic like wash barrels that you see like for barrel racers, but very often it's not going to have your level top, and that's going to be important. So if you do that, I would just go get your 32 gallon trash can, flip it over, cut out a round piece of plywood, or you can use the PVC like sheets, whatever it is. You just want a flat top that you're going to cut out, screw in, and then boom, you've got your barrels. You need 2 of those. And then you can use literally like Gatorade bottles. A lot of people start with, throw some sand in them, and then about half full. That's going to be great for your bottle races. And you can order the steel like mugs that you would use for camping. I wonder what size it. I'm like it's that size, whatever that is. Your steel mug. You're going to need 2 of those minimum.
I don't know. I just think of like
Probably
old
3.
Pioneer mugs without handles. Like,
yeah.
Just like a little.
And if they have
mugs,
handles, you chop them off. If you don't have that, go out, just get steel mugs so that they don't hurt you. You can leave the handles on if you need to. Just get started. So core races that you can practice, that I practice the most, probably bending, getting decent at your bending pattern, getting good at your 3 mug, and then because 3 mug helps with your turns coming back, turns going back out.
Yeah. So cone height is 45.5 centimeters. So un momento while I calculate that.
With centimeters to inch, because we're American.
Right. So 1 centimeter.
Wait, 45.5?
It was.
Okay, yeah, so it's an 18-inch cone.
Okay, so you were right.
Sweet. All right, I'm not crazy.
Yeah, 18 inches. You're right.
You can share it.
And then the large cone is 76 centimeters.
Which I believe is your 24-inch cone.
30.
30-inch cone.
Inches.
Ooh, that's going to be stuff like for Windsor Castle or We do
Joust.
some, joust. I'm just going to use
Bank.
it.
Right.
Bank. Some of those are like bank, and we've got, what is it, ring the cone, I think we do. We've got some like unique races that MGAA has. So governing organization, you've got IMGA that has their big rule book, and they've got core races that you see overseas and US. But then like MGAA has an addendum that has some extra races. In Canada, I believe they have an addendum and they have a couple of extra races. So it just depends on the organization that you play with. But that's still fundamental equipment that you're going to want to see. So we are coming up on like 45 minutes. And I wanted to check because I had a question and see if I covered some of the question here. A new to games member asked if we could do an overview on how you get started, what you need as a new games rider, equipment, knowledge, things to know that come with best procedures to form teams, etc., and then expand on that. Some stuff that we can know to get into the sport.
I think we talked about equipment.
Yep.
That's important. We talked about the teams, how you just have to reach out and you just have to like put yourself out there
Yeah.
and be
Get
willing to
engaged.
just show up and find that person you never met before and be like, let's ride together for the weekend.
So
Stuff that
a
you would
pony. I think a pony is the next thing, right? And that's
Yeah.
probably one of the most important.
Right.
Particularly, like we said, in the US, you usually are not going to have a pony that you're going to be able to buy that has a lot of games experience. If you could borrow a pony, that's huge, by the way, to get on a pony that has experience or get opportunities to get on and just practice with that pony. It can be huge to see where you have some weakness, or maybe the pony has some weakness, particularly when you're bringing up a green or new to games horse. But fundamentally, you want your pony under 15 hands. Depending on your height, you're going to need like different heights of ponies. So I'm super tall, over 6'1". I ride a pony that's at least 14.0 hands, super stocky, or goes all the way up to like 14.3, 15 hands. All of that's like my prime sweet spot. What would you say like your ideal height would be?
I'm probably between like a stocky 13 hand to like more like Arabian style 14.
Yeah.
So I think like that would be my max though. So right now Remington's 13.3 and stocky, and he is, I think, perfect. I think I could do a little bit more from a pony that would be like 13.2. So 13.2 would probably be the best balance for me, I think.
And we see riders that ride. I mean, if you're a younger kid, you see ponies that are all the way down to like 9.3 hands to 10 hands. I mean, little ponies, right?
It really depends on your height and your and your weight. And like I'm 5'4", like 125. So basically, I think between 13, 14 hands is perfect for me.
And it's huge too, I think, depending, and why it's typically left up to the chief ref's discretion is it depends on the rider balance as well. Yeah. So you can be a very tall rider, gangly tall, and not weigh a lot. And still, if you're not balanced, you can throw a very small pony off balance by just riding a little bit too just off the saddle, like if you're just kind of throwing your weight around with the pony, or especially when you're leaning. Whereas you can also be someone like my height. I have schooled ponies all the way down to 13 hands because I'm a very balanced, quiet rider. You can make it work. It's not ideal. It's definitely not where I would want to be competing, but you can bring a pony up like that. So you always just got to try to get a second opinion if you're trying to kind of push the limit of a smaller pony, but you can be flexible depending on your experience as a rider. But fundamentally, just find a pony where you feel comfortable being able to get back on. That's, I think, huge. You got to be able to mount, even if you're just stepping into the stirrup and getting back on.
I feel like the armpit rule really, really works well. So if like the pony's withers are at your armpit, I feel like overall that's a really good size pony for mounted games for you as an individual.
I hadn't thought about that. That's actually a really good, point of reference. You're right.
Because Remington's just a little bit above my armpit. That's why I was like, if it was 13.2, I feel like it would be perfect, my sweet spot. Yeah.
And Hero, I think, is just like below for me, just because of my height. So, and he's like 14.0, but then Fizz is definitely like right there, and he's like 14.2. So, that's actually a really good rule of thumb. So, I think when you're getting a new pony, though, particularly you look at games and you're like, that's a speed sport. And you think of barrel racing and you're like, all right, speed. And they just go for speed. That they want the power, particularly because there's a lot of money involved. You just want speed. Mounted games, though, is different because we have to be rateable and you have to have a pony that can go out, but your pony has to be able to come back and stand at some point. You've got to be able to at least pause while playing, which means your pony has to have enough wits about him to respect the rider instead of just like blowing through, particularly because at the higher like IMGA level of organization, so international play, you're going to be only in a snaffle. You're not able to use things like a gag or curb chain, anything like that. It's crazy, right?
I can't.
No, it's amazing to watch ponies and how rideable they are while also being quick. But the first fundamental thing is make sure your pony is rideable and your pony can come back to you. Yeah. So having a pony that just flies around the arena is not going to do anyone any favors because you're not going to be able to do anything with the equipment. You are a better asset to your team just loping along and making sure everything is perfect as you go than, blitzing through and not being able to come back and even hand something off to the next rider. So make sure your pony is rideable. In MGAA, by the way, and other sub-organizations, they do have addendums that allow other bidding options. I think a lot of it has to do with, in the United States, we've got Western riders. A lot of ponies are broke to ride with like a curb chain or gag pressure. So you can, if your pony can't ride in a snaffle, don't be discouraged. There are organizations that will let you play. But fundamentally, find a pony, kind of fits that armpit rule or socket, maybe a little higher, maybe a little lower. Yeah. And your pony has to be rideable, has to let you get on, has to not be too afraid of the equipment or too afraid of other horses being around them, running at them, running past them. If they are, take the time to desensitize them to those things before you really get them out there in competition, like expose them to maybe balloons on the ground or swinging sticks around them, their face without hitting them, obviously, and ponies riding in the arena with them. That's kind of your fundamentals when you're finding a pony. Now, when you do get started, if your pony's difficult, particularly if you're a younger kid who's getting started on a new pony, like expect that it will be difficult. That challenge, though, is going to make you a better rider, and pushing through and putting in, 3 years of time. And I know it seems like a lot, but my horse,
that's what makes
Hero,
the best games ponies is like exactly. 3 years is that sweet spot.
That's kind of your spot where you're like, all right, is this going to work or not? I've had Hero for 8 years and we finally hit it. So, but he's a spotty and we know he's developmentally challenged. I mean, how long did it take? Remington, I feel like it was the 3-year kind of mark started to turn for him.
Definitely 3 years. I feel like he's 5 years into like this year, and I feel like he's finally arrived. Like he's finally like he knows that he doesn't know everything, because I feel like once they hit 3 years is kind of the year where they're like, well, I know everything, so I'm just going to blow through it, and if you make a mistake, it's your problem and I'm not going back.
Yeah. It's so true. And then I think too, like, don't be afraid of age with games ponies. If your pony is generally sound, like especially if you're a younger rider that's getting started, go find that pony that's 15 plus years old. Mm-hmm. And I say that because you're like, oh, I want to have the pony the rest of my life. And it happens where it works out. And it's beautiful when that does work out. You go buy a really young horse and the kid grows with that horse. More often than not, though, it's very discouraging because you've got baby horse problems where the horse is growing in maturity, doesn't understand what's happening out there, has a lot of foundational stuff that needs put on. But then you also have a rider who's putting on their foundation at the same time. And it actually is so much harder to get the kid or even an adult rider who is newer, an amateur rider, to become polished in their skill work when they're also working with a horse. And so I bring a lot of horses up. I do a lot of training, and a lot of the horses I ride are very difficult because I enjoy the difficult, crazy horses, like my personal one, Hero. And I know there's been so many times where I personally started feeling super discouraged because my horse was really difficult and I saw my skills were just kind of tanking and I wasn't getting things done correctly. And I'm like, I've been doing this for too many years to be riding this way. And then you step back and you get on a horse that's a little bit older, a little bit wiser, more experienced. And you're like, okay, it's really not me. I just need to step back and build that foundation for the horse. Not everyone has that opportunity, though. So if you get the chance, go find the older, wiser, quieter horse that you can then push out and get some speed and put some years behind you and get experience with your team. Most of the games ponies I see that are very, very good are going to be in late teens. And you see games ponies that go up into their late 20s easily and are still competing. So don't be afraid of age as long as your horse is generally sound. So fundamentally, get involved, reach out, get in contact with one of the organizations, reach out to us, and try to plug in with either an organizer to go to a competition and see what it's all about, or get into a group that's doing a clinic, practice, whatever it is to get exposure. Start putting together some of your fundamental equipment to have at home. Even if you just go to Home Depot, it doesn't have to be expensive. And honestly, when I practice at home, even though I have equipment, very often I'll just go get like the little flat, tiny cones, like little ones. I just sort of set them out in a pattern and I practice my pattern. Like, you don't always have to do hand skills. Doesn't have to be expensive. If you have absolutely nothing, just get a whole little set of, like at the dollar store, of those cones and set them out and practice. Like, doesn't
Just
have to be
weave the
big.
cones and then you can do the
Exactly.
patterns. Right,
Like
right.
weaving
Another
cones,
thing I
burning
thought
them.
of was like, yeah, another thing I thought was super important is I grew up without horses. Like I did not have like access to horses. We have a ton of people in the games community that loan their horses out, that are like, "Hey, I have a loaner pony and I'm happy to loan this pony out. Keep in mind that you have to help cover their gas, their diesel, and pay for the pony to be there that weekend. But all you have to do is show up yourself like the day before the competition starts, maybe get a nice little practice done on the pony. As long as you have a good foundation of like equitation and understand a little bit of the games, you're going to do great. And
Yep.
we can find you a pony to ride, and you don't have to have a pony to start games."
That's such a good point to touch on that, right? You
Yeah.
start thinking, particularly because there are parents, I think, that get pulled, like their daughters are super like, "Oh, I want to get involved with horses." And they're like, "Oh my gosh, the expense." Like,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they step back and they look at this rationally and they're like, "This is a lot." And you're so right that you don't have to start big. Don't need all the equipment, and you don't even need a pony, right?
No.
There are so many people too, not just at competition, even though going to competitions is going to be huge to get that exposure and build the community, but there are so many barns, if you plug in, that would love to trade the opportunity for you to work, come and clean stalls, and feed horses, turn out, just do a bunch of fundamental stuff in exchange for riding time. If you don't have the money to actually pay for lessons, you can still just do a barter system where you work it off and get exposure. If you can find a situation like that where you can plug in and get on an experienced games pony that's going to give you that chance to just build some foundation, that is huge.
Right.
And you are so right. You can reach out, and very often people will loan ponies out in exchange for a fee or travel fee, gas, whatever it is you pay for your actual competition fees, your camping, whatever, your stall. But you don't have to own the horse, and you can just show up and get some experience. That is so huge. So if you want to do it, just reach out. That's the first step.
A ton
Right.
of people that do games have more than one games pony too. And sometimes they don't always live close to a community that it's easy to just haul their games ponies out there and practice. So if you reach out to somebody, you might end up finding out that someone lives right around the corner from you and they have more than one games pony and they'd like to work both horses at the same time, but they don't have the time to do it. All of a sudden, you just can drive over there on your own free will and practice with them. They can teach you the ropes, and it's more or less like the best way to learn, in my opinion. That's kind of how I started. I borrowed a lot of ponies to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and it comes back to, it's so good as a rider to make sure that you don't lock on to one way of doing things, whether it be riding with one set of people or riding one horse. And that is the fundamental thing. I think we have such a great situation because we have so many riders in our family. You have so many different ponies that you can get exposure to. And it's so good to see when you step off of your main competition horse that the way that you ride may impact a pony differently. And some ponies are going to respect it, a lot better, but some ponies, it just does not mesh at all. And you learn that each horse, it's a relationship that you have to be adaptable for. And I think a lot of people too, when they get on that first pony, they buy that first pony or they lease that first pony, they're like, it's not working. It's not going to work. You're forming a relationship. It's your first trial. Like, you don't expect it to go perfectly smoothly. Instead, focus on adapting in positive ways. That's going to make that a little bit better and a little bit more seamless, because that's what's going to make you a good rider. Being a good rider is being able to read the pony and adapt so that you have better communication and clearer communication. Then over time, you teach them to respect how you communicate, and it becomes a two-way conversation. So
Right.
such a good point to get on other ponies as well. Reach out, plug in, build some fundamental equipment, get on a pony, whether it's your pony or you borrow a pony, like that you can, if there's a will, there's a way. First thing though is to put yourself out there. The games community is such a wonderful, inviting, inclusive community. You have so many people that just want to see other people come out and ride and have fun. Right. And that's fundamentally, the sport is about having fun. There is no like major awards. There's not a lot of money involved. It is about people showing up and doing the best that they can with the pony they have that day. That's what makes it so exciting. So I think that we covered like some of the basics, right? In the future, we're going to have some guests on the show that are going to talk more about maybe plugging into the organization from their perspective, their stories, how they got involved. Definitely going to have another episode with Carly where we actually break down more of our independent stories and like, you know, fundamentally just building up our ponies like over the years and the trial and the error that comes with it. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts as well. Like,
any closing thoughts? Honestly, yeah, I think we covered the question at hand and kind of gave like a broad description of what mounted games actually is. But it's so multifaceted though. There are so many different avenues that we can go down, and I'm so excited for the future of this podcast because I feel like overall we're going to be able to cover so many different things. How do we keep our ponies fit over the winter? Like, how do you find a pony that is a great fit for mounted games? How do you know it's going to be a good fit before you pay, you know, these thousands of dollars to bring this pony home? And then if you don't own a farm, you're going to be spending thousands of dollars a year to board this pony. So it's a huge investment, but in all honesty, if you enjoy horses and you enjoy sport, like team atmosphere type sports, you are absolutely gonna love mounted games. It's the sport for you, and so excited for the next episode.
I know, right? And I think too, right? If you are a parent and you have your kids that are like, I want to get involved in this thing. I heard about mounted games, or maybe you hear about it from this podcast because someone shared it with you. Just know that the sport itself is so much more than just people with horses. Yeah. You are fundamentally, you're building these life skills of being able to communicate with other people. You're building responsibility. You are building up Thomas.
You ruined it, Tom. We're wrapping it up, man.
I was wrapping it up. I was so close. And closing thought, just know that if your, daughter comes to you and wants to get involved in horses, it is not just an expense that, is going to accrue and that's all you're going to get out of it. Like, you are building relationships, you're building a community, you're going to see, work ethic, you're going to build teamwork, communication, all of these avenues that translate into things like business and independent endeavors as you become an adult. And there are so many wonderfully successful people who've come out of college after riding games, all their teen years, and you just see them take so much initiative and they work so hard out there. And it's so exciting to see some of the kids since I have played so many years, like almost 2 decades, right? And I see people who are just these little kids and they come out of college and they're so well spoken and so engaged. And you're like, I think talking with them, the fact that they engaged in this community and did a sport like this for so many years and saw their parents so involved and saw families come together like this, like all of that helped to build them into these wonderful, strong, independent men and women as they moved on to adulthood. So mounted games, such a fabulous sport. It is such a great sport for spectators. Parents can jump right in. People are so supportive of new parents, new families, and new kids. Please reach out and get engaged, and look out for the next podcast episode that should be coming out in a week or so as we continue to unpack the amazing sport of mounted games on the Unbridled Talk Show. Thank you, Carly, so much for coming on the show as well. Definitely going to have you back. This has been so much fun.
Thank you for having me. I still feel like I have so much more we could talk
I
about.
know.
But we will save it for the next one, and I'm so excited.
All right, guys, we'll see you later. Have a good one.
You're listening to Unbridled with your host, Genevieve and Carly. Welcome to Unbridled.